We all rely on farmers and ranchers, but farming is riskier than other businesses out there. Crop insurance helps farmers manage their risk. With crop insurance, farmers put skin in the game by paying premiums and shouldering deductibles. That keeps taxpayers from having to pick up the whole bill every time disaster strikes. Today, about 90% of U.S. farmland is insured, providing $100 billion in protection to more than 130 different kinds of crops. It's a testament to the program's success.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And we have originated this program from a number of places across the country. We have never originated it from two places at once. This is truly Agri-Pulse history you're seeing here. As I am in my apartment up on Capitol Hill, and Phil is in his house out in Fairfax, Virginia, and we are doing our best to bring you the news and information for everything that's been going on this week and what it means for farm policy. Obviously, unprecedented times to say the least. But Phil, one of the things we have to mention is this kind of fast and furious pace that we've seen this week on a $2 trillion spending package that cleared the Senate earlier this week and then cleared the House here on Friday afternoon. And Phil, obviously, for ag, it's a $2 trillion price tag for the entirety of the legislation. But for agriculture, two big numbers, obviously being 14 and 9.5.
Right. $14 billion in this bill to replenish the Commodity Credit Corporation account at USDA. That's the account that they use to make the market facilitation program payments for 2018 and 2019. Obviously, a lot of pressure from farm country to consider another round of MFP, and President Trump has certainly opened the door to that. That's the $14 billion. Interestingly, there's another $9.5 billion set aside specifically. This is separate from the $14 billion. This $9.5 billion is set aside for livestock, specialty crops, of course, it's fruit, vegetables, nuts, and for local food systems, local and small-scale agriculture. That livestock portion that include beef, cattle, as well as dairy, as we know, both have really been experiencing some tough prices.
Well, and in the early part of this week, too, it was interesting because there was some folks that were wondering if, what iteration this final bill was going to end up taking. And it sounds like, based on some reporting and based on some conversations that you had, that some of the ag language was under the microscope in this as well.
Absolutely. We're told that USDA had actually asked for $50 billion in total CCC authority. What we have here is the $14 billion replenishment plus the $9.5 billion, so well short of what USDA said they needed. So we may revisit that issue, and this is phase 3 of the stimulus package, coronavirus relief. Phase 4 is coming next. We may see that revisited there somewhere down the line. In concert with Democrats wanted a increase in food stamp benefits, 15% increase in benefits, something that was done back during the 2009 recession. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has already said that that's going to be a top priority for Democrats going into phase 4. So look for all these issues to potentially be in play.
Well, and obviously we talked too about the big, kind of the big money, the big ticket items for agriculture being this CCC spending, but also some things in there in terms of loan guarantees and even some of the small business loans that we're talking about will not necessarily, they don't necessarily have agriculture in the title for what's on the specific legislation. But there's going to be at least some tangential benefits for ag too there.
Right. You have these direct payments that are being offered, and most Americans will qualify. It's $1,200 per individual and $500 per adult. Now there's you only get the full payment up to $75,000 for an individual and adjusted gross income, or $150,000 for a couple. Then it's phased down after that, but still most people will qualify for a portion of that. You mentioned the small business. There's issue loans. They're forgivable loans if you use them to cover payroll costs. And that's earmarked specifically for small business. So a lot of folks may qualify for that sort of help as well.
hmm So off of Capitol Hill, a lot of other various wheels are turning in response to this coronavirus outbreak. Perhaps one that had the most attention of folks in production agriculture was the concern over whether or not H-2A workers were going to be able to get into the country, as they a lot of them were stuck in their home countries looking to get interviews at consulate offices that were closed by the State Department. And just this week, just in the last day, really, we saw the State Department decide to take action, decide to waive a lot of these interview requirements should there be nothing flagged on the application quite yet. Got to imagine that's a big sigh of relief to a lot of folks out in farming.
Yeah, it was a huge move by the State Department. Particularly affected Mexico, where about 90%, something like 90% of the H-2A workers originate. Of course, they've shut down most of their embassy consulate activities down there. What they did is they are going to waive interviews for a whole lot of folks. That was, you heard a big sigh of relief across D.C. and the farm groups, because so many of them rely on H-2A, increasingly rely on H-2A. These have a couple of lingering issues with South Africa, where some workers come from, and also from Central America. But a lot of optimism that all these issues can now be worked out, and we'll get the workers that they need, the farms need.
Yeah, so obviously that was something that very, very early on, before this outbreak spread to the extent that it has in the last couple of days, that was something that folks had flagged for us as a big issue. And so obviously a lot of folks very, very relieved when they got this these interview waivers. But something else to keep an eye on in that situation, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Labor both expressing an interest and potentially looking into extending some of the current H-2A visas for folks that are already in the United States, to maybe allow them to stay a little bit longer and, under the H-2A program, which is specific for ag work. But a number of different avenues being looked at to try and address the farm labor concern right now.
Yeah. And this is also part of our agencies are dealing with a whole raft of issues that have come up with supply chain. This being one of them. The Food Safety Inspection Service, the FDA, have taken some steps to kind of make it easier because there's a whole bunch of food that was intended for restaurants that's now in food service and schools, and I got to find another home, presumably in grocery and supermarkets, because that's where we're getting most of our food now. Huge shift. And USDA has also taken some action relative to getting eggs moved from one channel to the other. Just a whole host of issues that the departments of agencies have had to deal with to try to facilitate this shift and diversion of food and keep things as little as possible from going to waste.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if any of you happen to have watched any of the floor debate in the House or Senate here this week, a lot of folks in their remarks saying, this is a virus, this is a disaster that we did not ask for, and it's one that we're going to have to defeat, and it's one that a lot of folks, I've said a couple times, if a tornado hits a community, as terrible as it sounds, there is a blueprint to follow. If a hurricane hits an area, there is a blueprint, there is steps that can be taken, but a lot of folks are kind of learning on the job on this. There's just not a ton of previous evidence that they can look at in terms of how they should approach this situation. So obviously that's something that's being taken into consideration now as folks are reacting to a pretty serious disease and a pretty serious reaction across the country to it. But before we let you go, did want to just touch on one bit of non-coronavirus bit of news and information. And that being the Trump administration opting against appealing a 10th Circuit ruling that struck down 3 small refinery exemptions from the renewable fuel standard. A lot of folks in the biofuels community very happy to hear this. A lot of folks in the small refinery community decidedly unhappy to hear this, as this means that ruling could potentially be expanded nationwide. EPA putting out a statement today that they are looking at when that appeals process is over and done with, because they didn't appeal, but a couple of the smaller refineries did. whenever that process is over and done with, they will be looking to implement the mandate of the court. A lot of folks going to be very interested in the particulars of how EPA approaches that situation, but certainly something to follow here in these next couple of weeks and months here as we keep an eye on what's going on in all of the various realms of farm policy. But a lot of things that we are covering right now, I did not anticipate we would be covering 2 or 3 months ago. I'm sure, Phil, I'm sure you can relate. But
Absolutely,
a lot of things keeping us very busy, and we will do our best to keep you up to date and informed in all of the various forms of communication that we have. Certainly, if you have any suggestions for the backdrops that Phil and I are using, we are both open books right now. Total blank canvases, blank templates in this regard. This is something we've never done before, so by all means, feel free to reach out and offer.
Doing either.
By all means, feel free to reach out and let us know what you think, and let us know. And as we said last week in this video as well, if you've got something going on that you're seeing an impact of the coronavirus in your industry, in your community, by all means reach out, let us know. We'd be happy to look into it, do some reporting, and see what's going on, and see how it's going to affect the industry that you all work in. But I think that's all of the news and events for this week that we're going to cover. So I think that's going to do it for this week. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.